A new study from MIT has been getting a lot of attention because it is touting some seemingly explosive findings. It claims that 95% of generative AI pilots at companies are failing. So the authors write, despite $30 to $40 billion in enterprise investment into Gen AI, this report uncovers a surprising result in that 95% of organizations are getting zero return. Just 5% of integrated AI pilots are extracting millions in value, while the vast majority remain stuck with no measurable P&L impact. Now, to get to this finding, the researchers conducted 52 structured interviews across enterprise stakeholders and did an analysis of 300 plus public AI initiatives and announcements, as well as surveys with 153 leaders. So some people are using this as proof that we are in an AI bubble and the technology's capabilities are way overhyped. So, Paul, you've obviously got some feelings on this. Maybe take us beyond the headline here.
Yeah, this definitely just blew up. I mean, by like Thursday and Friday, I got asked about this 2 or 3 times on live events on Thursday and Friday, like different AMA sessions we did last week. And then it was just all over LinkedIn. Like I couldn't open LinkedIn without someone commenting on this thing being at the top of my feed. So, first and foremost, I would say I'm a big advocate of, I love research. I love when people try and take different perspectives on where we are with AI adoption, what best practices look like. I'm not a big fan of headlines for headlines' sake. And so my initial reaction when I first saw this, I had not had time to dig into it when I got asked initially about it last week. And I said, listen, anytime you see a headline like that, you have to immediately step back and say, okay, that seems unrealistic. Like that instinct in you that's like, hey, it's a little bit of a red flag maybe about this research. So my general policy on any of this stuff is I won't share it anywhere on social media or talk about it on the podcast until we've actually looked at the methodology they use to arrive at their data. And so I didn't share anything on social media about this. I didn't even comment on anybody's. I got tagged by like 5 different people to comment on this thing on LinkedIn, and I just left it alone for the time being. So then Sunday morning, or I guess it was Saturday morning, I write the exec AI newsletter that we send out through SmarterX. And so Saturday morning, I finally sat down for like an hour and a half, went through the full research report, read the whole thing, looked at the methodology, and then I wrote an editorial for the newsletter that sort of explained my perspective on the research itself. So I'll just kind of like go through a quick synopsis. Anyone who reads the Exec AI newsletter has, kind of heard my thoughts a little bit on this, but I'll explain my thinking. So what I said in the newsletter was like, I honestly would have never read past the executive summary if this hadn't gone viral. Like it was very, very apparent right away that this research wasn't super valid. So my problem with it, and Mike, you read it, was the first opening line says, despite 30 to 40 billion in enterprise investment in GenAI, this report uncovers a surprising result in that 95% of organizations are getting zero return. Zero is an extremely bold statement to make in any form of research. um, and so that alone basically told me that everything else I was about to read probably wasn't super viable in terms of how they extracted that information. And so the first thing I did is actually then jumped ahead to their research methodology and limitations section. And because I want to understand, how are they defining the return? Like what exactly are they considering a return in this situation? So they said success defined as deployment beyond pilot phase with measurable KPIs, ROI impact measured 6-month post pilot adjusted for department size. So it's like, okay, so they're specifically, I think, now getting into like revenue, it seemed, maybe like revenue
Right.
and profit, and only over a 6-month period. And then they go on to explain the figures are directionally accurate based on individual interviews rather than official company reporting. So it's like, okay, so they only did 52 interviews, and their feedback that zero return from 95% is based on 52 interviews that are quote unquote directionally accurate. So again, it's starting to kind of like fall apart a little bit in my mind what's going on here. And then they offer a research note that they define successfully, this is quote unquote, define successfully implemented for task specific GenAI tools as ones users or executives have remarked as causing a marked and sustained productivity and or P&L impact. They did touch a little bit on the idea of individual productivity, but not overall productivity. Even that alone is like, well, how do you have individual productivity when you combine it to not have collective productivity? So I wasn't really clear exactly how they were analyzing that. So they didn't really seem to get into efficiency gains, reduction of cost, things like that. The productivity lift part, they didn't give any indication of how they were measuring that, if at all, within the results. And then the overall performance, like it wasn't considering customer churn reduction, lead conversion rate improvement, sales pipeline velocity, customer acquisition costs, like all that was just getting thrown out the window. And so if you're going to say something has zero return, how can you do that without acknowledging all the other ways that AI can benefit? So I don't know. So I did still read through the whole thing, and there was elements of it that made sense. But my point was like, it wasn't because of the methodology. It was like you could just sit back and say these things without doing any research of what's going to make a pilot work and not work. And so I don't know that the methodology itself held up. And then my final challenge with the methodology overall was they touted this 300 plus public AI initiatives and announcements that they researched, and nowhere in the report does it explain anything about that research. Like, how did they find them? What were they? How did they assess them? How did they synthesize that within the findings itself? So overall, I would just caution people. One, when you see what is that saying, Mike? Like something like great profound claims require great
Yeah,
profound like
yeah,
supporting material. I like butchering the quote itself, but the point is when you see something like that, 95%, 5% with no return, that's a very, very bold claim that needs to have very strong supporting evidence. And so my greatest takeaway from this is people need to be a little bit more critical of headlines, and they, rather than being the first one to jump on with breaking, like 95%, like we all see it on X and LinkedIn, everything starts with breaking, all caps. Before we jump to posting things like that, take 3 minutes and just read the methodology and how they got to these things. And you may find that it's maybe just fitting a data point and a headline to a narrative, and that people just run with it on social media because people love this stuff. So, all this being said, again, I don't want to like, belittle the research itself and the work that went into it. It's hard to do research really well. Um, I just think sometimes we maybe shouldn't publish things that aren't like don't stand up to the scrutiny of the headline that you yourself write into the lead paragraph. So, all that being said, if nothing else, it gives us a reason to step back and say, okay, so what should we be doing to make sure our pilot projects work? I would keep this really simple. Have a plan for your pilot projects. Personalize use cases by individuals. Don't go get ChatGPT or Copilot or Gemini and just give it to people. Give them 3 to 5 use cases that help them get value day one. Provide education and training on how to use the tools. Think about it as a change management thing, not a technology thing. And then know how you're going to measure success. It isn't all 6 months out did it impact the P&L. As a matter of fact, that's probably pretty rare. So
mm,
the one thing I would say is within the fine-tuned criteria they were using to define success, maybe it's not that shocking of a headline. It's the fact that that's the zero return thing is what just like immediately threw me off, as that is a ridiculous statement. So I don't know. That's my soapbox take. It's like, please don't put any weight into this study. Please do not cite this study in some, thing you're using for management to convince them about investing. This is not a viable, statistically valid thing. It is, I guess, my overall point I would make here.
I mean, it's just such a critical reminder, especially with everyone trying to fit their narratives as well. You could tell there are a lot of people that have been saying like, "Oh, I've been saying there's an AI bubble forever. Here's the proof." Everyone's trying to fit this
Yes.
into what they want to believe.
And you can make data say anything. Like and again, like when I was building, and I know you do the same thing, Mike. When I was building the AI Academy courses, you do like as an instructor, it's like I believe this to be true. I'm very
Mhm.
confident what I believe is true. Let me go see if I can find any data to support
Yep.
it. And then you go and do a search. Like heaven forbid you use like deep research to do these things because there's all these websites that are basically just curations of data sets, and they pick like the one sentence out of a report, and then they throw it in there like 20 things to know about AI adoption, and they all sound amazing, like, well, this would make for a great slide. And then you take a moment to go figure out where are they getting this quote from, And then you find the original source and then you read the methodology. Like, this is from 2022. Like, this isn't even a thing. And I just think there's not enough critical thinking about the data points we use. Because to your point, Mike, like it's you want that supporting thing. You want the thing to validate what you believe to be true. And so it's easy to find a data point that supports you. But we need to be a little bit more honest with the things that we use to make these cases.
Yeah.
And it's not always easy. I get it. We want that easy data point, and sometimes it's just not there.